So, Tiffany, I'll start with you. Start with Good American Family. One of the things I love about this show is just kind of the breadth of the music on it. I mean, you've got these like 70s songs like Romeo's Tune and Sometimes When We Touch, and then the Green Day, there's Miley Cyrus, there's Jimmy Eats World, it's all kinds of stuff. And so I'm curious for you, on a show like this, what are the kind of parameters that either you set for yourself or the showrunner sets for you in terms of what the kind of musical language is going to be?
So for this show, Katie Robbins and Sarah Sutherland, who are the showrunners, we discussed this a lot. And we kind of felt like the music should really kind of help define the characters, So we wanted to keep everything kind of like Middle America, Heartland, and really what they listen to. So, there's a ringtone, for instance, in there. That's the Pussycat Dolls. And that was in the script. And I kept kind of like being like, what is this? And apparently it was really their ringtone in real life. So, that the parameters were kind of like, what do these characters that, probably late 90s, early 2000s grew up listening to, what kind of stuff do they respond to? And, we kind of went for that zone of like radio stuff that they were connected to and maybe said a little bit about them. Mm-hmm. Like, for instance, the Mark Duplass, the Michael Barnett listening to the Green Day and that being his mad music, it's not gangster rap, it's not metal, it's not, Korn or something, it's Green Day. And at some point in the edit, we thought maybe we should try something different. And I think that Green Day is perfectly Michael, it's got like, he's kind of like this wounded man-child, and it's got this pop kind of sensibility to it while still having edge. And I don't know. That's one of my favorite choices, and that was in the script.
Yeah, no, that's definitely one of the things I love about the show is how much the music is kind of expressive of character, and that it kind of leads me into Daredevil because I feel the same way about the score for that. It feels like you guys kind of found this like musical language for his inner state. And I'm wondering for you, is that the starting point when you come onto something like this? Is it character? Is it more a sound of the city? Like what are your first conversations like?
Yeah, that's exactly it. It's usually the characters, like who are these characters and where are they and what's the vibe of what's happening. And specifically with Daredevil, it was like the city plays a big role. So Taylor and I had been talking about, does the city have a theme? And we decided that the city was kind of like an omniscient like presence that is always sort of calling out to the people of the city, whether they're the vigilantes or just the everyday people. And the idea was to sort of have the city have its own theme that kind of calls out and is only answered by the themes of each character or sometimes not answered, I guess, if that makes sense. That kind of, yeah.
Yeah, then we just mainly focus on the internal sort of struggle of each character. So from the pre-existing Daredevil, John wrote this beautiful theme. So we really wanted a theme for Matt, especially since there's so much struggle with, should he be Daredevil? Is it more, harm than good? And that's sort of where we started.
Mm-hmm. When you're working on a show like this that does have a sort of previous iteration, I mean, is that a help or is it a challenge trying to figure out that balance of what you're going to bring over and where you're going to strike out in new directions?
I think the fans dictate a lot of what's to be expected because on previous IP, that's not particularly that old. As a fan, you're sort of expecting something from the character, whether it's Star Wars or whatever it may be. I think if it's a reboot or something that's older, you have a lot more bandwidth to change it. And I think the creatives know that. They know that hey, if we change this might not end well from the fan base. So I think that's kind of where we started from, and we had talks and discussions about how we were going to incorporate that and maybe enhance things with organ and choir, bring in some more religious elements. But, there was a lot to work with just Daredevil already.
Now, Sid, you've got two shows we're talking about here, Only Murders in the Building and Paradise, both very, very different scores. And in the case of Only Murders in the Building, obviously a show you've been on since the beginning. So for you, when you're coming out in the new season, sort of similar to the question in a way about Daredevil, like what do you want to keep to carry over? Where do you feel like you need to stay consistent? And where do you see opportunities to kind of try new things?
Well, for Only Murders, John Hoffman, who's the showrunner and co-creator with Steve Martin, John is like every season sort of wants to reinvent stuff, which is exciting. So we don't have to like sit and use the same score every year. So John and I will have a conversation like, a few months before they shoot. And he'll sort of walk me through the arc of the whole season. And then I'll just start writing a few new themes for the season. So, I'm not going to tell you what's going to happen this season, but it's cool. And so, I've been working with John for the past month and just honing this new thematic idea for the season. And what's fun about it is that we start early so that by the time we're shooting, we have some semblance of what the theme sounds like. And he's also given me tons of notes on like how to develop it more and what to do. So that's exciting. So by the time we hit the ground running, there's already this thing. So I don't have to like think of it right away when we're starting season. So I start a little early.
One of the probably highest compliments I can pay you is that if I didn't see the credits, I wouldn't think that Only Murders in the Building and Paradise were by the same composer, because they really sound like nothing alike. I mean, Only Murders in the Building is the kind of show where, you kind of hum the themes after you watch it. And Paradise is very different. It's like much more kind of, it's the score is almost like sound design in places. And I was wondering if you could talk a little bit about how you came up with that approach.
Yeah, for Paradise, so for Paradise, there's no main title sequence like there is in Murders. So Murders, that like da 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 da, that theme was written for that title sequence, and then that became the sort of like main theme. So on Paradise, we don't really have a title sequence, but I'll remember like. So I work on Paradise with my good buddy Dan Fogelman, and we've known each other since we've known each other longer than we haven't at this point. We know each other from freshman year of college, and now I'm 25, so just a couple years out. So we've known each other for a bit. You guys laughed at that, like so. I'm turning 50 in 2 years. 2 years. It's like, I don't know why I announced that. That was weird. But Dan has this like, Dan will send me a script. And so he sent me his pilot script for Paradise. And in typical like, in just how our relationship is, I don't read it right away when he sends it to me. It takes me a while to get around to it. And every time I see him, so I saw him for like, every time I'd see him, he'd be like, have you read the script yet? I'm like, oh no, dude, I'm going to get to it. I promise I'll get to it. And he's like, you're the only person I send a script to who doesn't read it right away. And I'm like, I promise I'll read it. He's like, good, because day after tomorrow, we have a Zoom with all of these Disney executives. And Dana Walden is going to be on that Zoom, and you're going to play her the main theme for the show. And I was like, what? And he's just like, yeah. And I was like, oh, fuck. So I read the script like right after we hung out. And then I wrote this little thematic idea. And he liked it, and I played it on piano in this meeting. So that ended up becoming something, and you hear it here and there, like it's sporadically in the score. But this is like a tension-filled thriller. And so what was nice was I had that theme, and then for, again, the same situation for a couple months before we shot, I was just feeding ideas to Dan, Glenn, and John, our directors, who are amazing. And everybody was very specific about like what they wanted to feel. They're like, we want to constantly feel like we are trapped in this world and we can't get out. And so it was very tonal, very textured string stuff. We experimented with a lot of sort of like weird sounding string performances and a lot of loops. I did a lot of looping. I got to kind of go back to my band days and pull out analog synths and stuff. So that was fun.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Now, Ariel, as far as Dying for Sex goes, one of the things I really like about that show, and I know a lot of people have commented on it, is it's a really, really delicate tone. I mean, it's a show about cancer, but it's also like got this kind of jaunty feeling to a lot of it. I mean, it's really like riding this line between comedy and tragedy the whole time. And so I'm curious for you, like, what are the pleasures and the challenges of having to figure out a way to kind of unify that through the music?
Yeah, I mean, it was so unique. The tone itself and how we went about it. I mean, I was brought in pre-production. I mean, I was brought in while they were shooting. And so we had a lot of time to experiment with ideas and would it actually work against picture. And I had, two great music editors, Zach Millman, Andrew Ransom, who threw up things to every scene and gave us all these different options. And it was really all about just seeing what was working and like how to play the comedy. Michelle and Jenny are so amazing in their performances and how not to double down on what they were already giving us. But anyway, like I honestly stayed true to what my pitch at the interview was. Honestly, it was about this is like a woman whose body is betraying her and using her body in her last days of life to kind of experience as much life as possible, and how better to do that than by using your body. And so there's a lot of joy, there's a lot of messiness, there's a lot of like human-esque sounds, and it's kind of, very organic, but also very fun. It was like, I'm as perplexed as anyone is how we did it, but like, we just kept trying a million different things and we had the time to do it. I think that was really important. Just bringing a composer on really early was amazing, and why we pulled that off, I think.
Well, and now obviously Dying for Sex and Agatha All Along, in some ways, very different shows, but kind of a similar issue in terms of the tone. Like Agatha All Along, sometimes it's very silly, sometimes it's straight on horror. It builds towards kind of poignancy by the end. And so I guess I have a similar question for you, Michael, is how did you see your role in terms of kind of helping unify that tone and kind of make the whole thing feel like it's the same show?
Yeah, no, good question. So that's one of the, the big dilemma we kind of faced with at the very beginning was coming from WandaVision. Agatha's this, the supervillain. She's just straight up evil. And here now she's an anti-hero and we're trying to, sympathize with her. And she's like still super shitty throughout the show. She treats the whole coven terribly. She's a bully. And you don't really get her, like the understanding of her trauma and her motivations until the very end of the show. And so that was this balance that we had to find of like, how do we still like her? She's really funny, but she's mean. And she's not a hero. And so we're really trying to sort of understand she's not a supervillain, she's not a hero, what is she? And I think, with all the characters in Agatha, they're all these social outcasts that are pushed to the fringes of their different groups, and they all are, looking for sisterhood, looking for empowerment, looking for relationships that, that they can, build together. And so that was really, I think the first thing we did was sort of just get rid of the traditional superhero sound, get rid of, no French horns, no trumpets, these instruments traditionally associated with, like the Marvel superhero. And we had this weird ensemble of strings, 6 trombones, a tuba, and a lot of like processed effects and electronics. And that allowed us to really like unpack her character and unpack, the coven as well, and sort of dig into this sort of eerie and the horror vibes of that. But then we were still able to play the comedy and really, fluctuating between all these different tones.
Now, on English Teacher, you've got this fantastic soundtrack of, great 80s pop songs, including a lot of songs that are like soundtrack songs, like Maniac from Flashdance, I Can Dream About You from Streets of Fire. It's a contemporary show, so I'm curious how you came up with the plan to use all of those songs from that era on this show.
It definitely is a big swing. Considering we are a contemporary show. Brian Jordan Alvarez, who created the show, he from the beginning had a vision about trying to incorporate 80s music. And one of the biggest parts of it was we had a rule. We had two big rules. One, all the 80s music, it needs to feel timeless and classic, which in a way is why you hear some of these soundtrack songs. We were creating a classic cinematic soundtrack. And you're dealing with a high school, and it's a bit of this ode to a coming of an age feel to it. With that, we also wanted to find the humor and the heart. And so that's why we use a lot of songs that they bring up some kind of familiarity, but they still had to work in a very timeless and classic way. We weren't trying to just play a joke. We were trying to make a greater narrative with it. And the other rule with it is we weren't using a composer on the show. So that's kind of the big key in this, is we were also looking at songs that we could use as themes because we didn't have a composer for the show. He very purposely, one of the first conversations I had with Brian when I came on was the fact that he thought the dialogue and the songs should set pacing and tone and an emotional narrative and a path towards that like you would do with a composer, but wanted to do it with the songs and the dialogue. And so that's really how we found the 80s of it all. And then we found other songs that were current to complement them, if you will.
Now, I want to demystify a little bit what a music supervisor does. Maybe both you and Tiffany can address this, because I think a lot of people, myself included, hear that title and think that's the best job in the world. You just come up with playlists of great songs for movies. And I'm curious, what the intersection is between that, the creative, fun part, and the administrative part. I mean, the researching, the figuring out. I'm guessing that a lot of times you have to even figure out who owns these songs. How do you get them? How do you fit them into your budget? All that kind of stuff. And I was wondering if you could both kind of talk a little bit about that process.
I'll use the 80s side of it. This is one of the things that a lot of people don't realize about the job, is there's a huge business aspect about this job, right? And being able to understand the business of it to help your creatives navigate the creative side of this. The 80s side of it, there are a lot of 80s artists out there who, as time has gone on, there are loopholes in their deals that if they re-record their music, they can now control it. Well, we're doing a show that, again, trying to be very cinematic and true to what we're doing here in the heart of the show, is we really want the sound and the feel of those original recordings. There's a lot of artists out there that you can't get their original recordings. You have to use re-records. So somebody like me as a music supervisor, that's part of what I'm doing, is I'm helping navigate what can and can we not do in terms of business. And then from there, you got to figure out the rights. You've got to be able to negotiate if you're on a budget. There's a laundry list of not so glamorous things to this job.
Yeah, I'd say everything that Jen said. I mean, I think that one of the key roles of music supervisors is helping support, your creator, showrunner, fulfill their dream of what they want. But because the business is so complicated, it doesn't matter how big your budget is. There can be reasons that you cannot get the song that you want. And I think the creative side of it is, for somebody like me who grew up working in record stores, is being able to think of something really quick as a backup, and to know, you do need to know who owns it. You need to know who wrote it. You need to know all this information about it as a researcher, and be able to offer suggestions for replacements. And I can't think of a single show that I've been on where that hasn't been needed, no matter what the budget is. So, there's a couple things in Good American Family that just we couldn't get, so yeah, I like both aspects. I like the creative part, and then I really like researching things too. So
I'm curious, for each of you on your shows, was there a particular song that was really hard to get that you were really happy you were able to finally land?
There's a couple, actually. New Order, not easy, and The Cars, not easy.
Well, I wouldn't say it was difficult, and I can't give any spoilers, but Shiloh is a big theme throughout the series. I'll just leave it at that. And it's it's used a couple times in this first episodes, and then it reappears in a different kind of way.
Well, something Tiffany said raised a question for me with the composers, which is, she was talking about like wanting to help serve the showrunner, and I'm curious how you all kind of find a language to talk about music with the showrunners and the directors or whoever you have to be working with, because a lot of filmmakers don't necessarily understand how to articulate in musical terms what they want, and I'm curious how you guys kind of find that language and how you find the best way to communicate with filmmakers that you work with.
I mean, it changes for every filmmaker, and it's amazing how much it does. When we work with Mike Flanagan on projects, I think the first project on Oculus, he turned to us and said, "Oh, I want you to go to F major, and then we'll go over here to the A minor." And I was like, "Oh, well, okay," and invert this, and I was like, "Wow, okay, here we are." And then he would hear things and know things. And we've been with other directors who are like, make it red. You know what I mean? So it's interpret, trying to, you do your best job you can. And I think in the end, it's always best for us if it's, what's the emotion, what they're trying to get across, what is the goal, and finding a common, ground to speak on, I think is, yeah.
Yeah, it's a lot like a relationship. Like I've been on a date in a really long time, but like it reminds me of what that is like, right? You like meet someone, you sit down, you're like, oh, do they like spaghetti or do they want hot dogs? I mean, no one probably wants hot dogs, but I'm just saying, such a big difference. You don't know. Maybe that is. Maybe they want to go to a Dodger game and you don't know. But that's what it feels like on every project, right? You're kind of like, oh. And sometimes if you say the wrong thing, it might throw them off. So you're very hesitant, but you need to get to the truth really quickly, because when you tiptoe around what is not the truth in music land, that lands in a deep dark hole where you're all alone. So
the key is reading the script. It's really, really important. Yeah, that's it. That's what I was going to say.
I mean, I'm super intimidated when I speak to writers because I feel like I can't express myself in any way, shape, or form like they can. And so it's like, I love just digging into it and showing, kind of talking as little as possible before you actually create something. I mean, after you've established what you're trying to do and emotionally. But yeah, I think you can, I've found you can get lost in the weeds discussing way too much about instrumentation or approach, or and you also don't have the same idea of what is cinematic, what is sparse, what is melodramatic, and it's like it's easiest once you just get into it. But yeah, it's a toughie.
I think it also helps just to have showrunners and producers that are very trusting, and we were blessed with Jack Schaefer and Mary Livanos that they really had a clear vision of what they were looking for, even if they didn't have the musical, expression for that. And they really trusted me and Chris to really, experiment and kind of actually pushed us out of sort of like what our initial instincts were. And, I think especially at the beginning of the process, it's really fun to, just throw a bunch of stuff at the wall and sort of see what sticks. And, try all these different colors, all these different elements and different instruments. And then be able to, have a common ground there, and then you can start, finessing from there. And, but I think at the end of the day, it's just really, trusting each other as collaborators that, we're finding out what the sound is together.
Mm-hmm. Well, and in terms of the music supervision, Jen and Tiffany, I'm curious, when you're communicating with filmmakers, like, what's the sort of line between your own personal, how do you kind of reconcile your own personal taste in music with what the needs of the filmmakers and the needs of material? Because, I'm assuming, as in some cases, like you're talking about the music that these characters would listen to is probably not what you would listen to.
Yeah, I mean, I'm not sure that the showrunners actually listen to a lot of what's in there either. I mean, but to me, that's kind of the funnest part of it too, is, I have my taste, and, like I said, I grew up working in record stores. I started working in a record store when I was 16. And in a weird way, it's kind of similar because you have customers who come in and have specific tastes, and you can go, oh, you like Green Day? Well, then you'll like, this record by Rancid or, whatever. Or you'll find something totally obscure that they've never heard and be able to show them something like that. And I don't know, as a music nerd and a musician and stuff, I've kind of gotten like a little bit of an elitist bubble, I think, myself with my music tastes. And when I was able to start doing this job, I found it really opened myself up to listening to music in a different way than I was used to, which was, a very specific thing that I would do for myself. But listening to something for somebody, for a character, for a project, kind of brings you joy with music in a whole other way that, I don't know. I can start to appreciate songs that I didn't appreciate before because I'm listening to it for a different purpose. So as a music lover, I mean, it's kind of the best job in the world. I mean, there is the business side, but it really opens you up from your small bubble of elitist, snobby music taste into really being able to hear things differently.
Mm-hmm. To that point, for me, it's an analogy I've used many times. I think I get what people travel for. The same thing that a lot of people like to go and travel and experience different things is why I love this job, because of this exact challenge is you have to figure out not only different ways to communicate, but you're learning what these characters are, and then you're figuring out what it is they want to listen to, what it is they would be putting on their soundtrack, what is in their car, what is it when they're playing the stereo when they get in the shower in the morning, like whatever that is, it's not you, it's them. And to me, it's like traveling, because when I get each project does a different thing. Each project lives in a different space. And I love that. I love being able to go to different places. And it's challenging when you are having to learn something new with new people. Everybody, I'm sure we all deal with this. Everybody has different ways of speaking in different adjectives that aren't always adjectives, and it's odd. But you do the best you can, and you learn what red means when somebody says make it red. Like you just kind of learn. But going on that journey with somebody, again, it's like traveling, and there's just something really beautiful about that, because music is this connective tissue. And it's always different. It's always an exploration, and you just kind of go for it.
Mm-hmm. Sid, one of the things that's really interesting in the Paradise score is it sometimes is sort of woven in with these songs, and there's different covers of songs, and you kind of you sort of weave in Phil Collins' Another Day in Paradise into the score at times in one of the later episodes. And I was wondering what kinds of conversations you're having, or what kind of collaboration do you have with the music supervisor on that show in terms of making the score and the songs work together?
Normally, you would think that we work together more on stuff like that. But oftentimes, like on that show, some of these songs were scripted in. And Dan had written some of them in, and Manish and Tom, our music supervisors, great music supervisors, they got a bunch of covers made as well of some of these songs. So normally when I'm in there, I'm working with editors pretty early on, and we know that a song is scripted for a place. But if the editor and I are working on it, and we're like, well, let's present the score option. Which we did a few times too. We did that as well, and sometimes the score would live, and sometimes the song would live. So, but in terms of getting in and out of it, the only thing that we had to sort of be cognizant of was like, is the key that I'm in going to be? Is it going to rub? Are they compatible keys going into the song and going out of it? And it's funny when you asked about like the songs in Paradise, because I think like when I talk to my parents about like what, like they're always like, they're like, oh my God, we saw this episode. They're like, we love the song that you did at the end of the episode. And I'm like, no, that's not what I do. Like, that's not my job. So, I think my parents think I'm a music supervisor. But yeah, so there's, you have to find ways to sort of do it so when the song comes in, you're not, it feels like it was always there. Yeah.
We've talked about how a lot of these scores and song choices, everything are motivated by character. And Ariel, you kind of touched on this, but I was wondering if you could talk about a little bit more, like on Dying for Sex, how much, not just the character, but the actual actor and the way they're playing it, how much does that inform the score? Like how much does Michelle Williams' performance inform your approach to the music?
Yeah, I mean, absolutely. Their characters they lent so well to creating musical themes before I even saw their performances. I mean, with Molly, played by Michelle, it was, it's this woman who's getting back in touch with her body and kind of hating what it's doing. And this, Michelle brought this beautiful, really raw, but also very fun and buoyant, really brave performance to it. And so for her, it was much more about voice, percussion, very kind of organic, mellow palette. Whereas with Nikki, who's kind of all over the place in this beautiful comic relief, and Jenny Slate was perfect embodying that. That was much more synth-driven, energy-driven, kind of sporadic, chaotic. And then obviously how their palettes intertwined. I think the hardest thing from on the show was how do we not douse it with emotionalism, especially when there is a death and there's a friendship that is stronger than any relationship, and how the beauty of that support system. And I think, we were really super restrained with that because their performances gave so much already. And if I had done something, the score is super, super small in terms of elements and approach. And I think if I had done anything any bigger than it would have totally ruined what they had already done in their performances. So, it's always a mix. Like when you get involved in pre-production, you're not reacting to performances yet. You're writing to ideas. Whereas when you actually put stuff to picture, it's such a different thing.
Michael, you mentioned your co-composer on Agatha All Along, Chris, and I was wondering, I'm curious to hear from you and from the Newton brothers a little bit about collaboration, how it works when there's two composers on a project. Like, what's the division of labor like? Are you guys in a room together? Are you trading themes back and forth? Are you working on some stuff and he's working on some stuff? How does that work?
Yeah, so I've been working with Chris since 2017, he's a dear mentor of mine, and so we really have been together long enough to have this really in sync musical hive mind. And so, we're working separately at home, but we have been together enough where we're able to be really seamless in sort of our process and, passing stuff back and forth. And so I think really spent a lot of time establishing the themes and really, setting up the world. And, I've previously working on WandaVision as well. And so we already have sort of some familiarity with that. And I think, same way as trusting our collaborators, we have a lot of trust with each other, and are able to really just sort of, love vibing off ideas with each other and know how to sort of take something from one person and carry it to the other. And so it's pretty seamless. We also have amazing music editor, Fernand Boss, in the house, and he is a big, big part of that collaboration as well. And so I think just having that strong team makes the difference.
Do you guys act as therapists for each other too, like we do?
For sure.
I mean, I think that's a big part of it, right? Like, who's crying harder today? Okay, I'm gonna if it's me, he'll listen, and vice versa. But I think that's really important, right? Like in anything you're doing, I feel like there's the listening to the showrunners and the team that's around you and who you're writing the music for. But then it's listening to each other and sort of taking that aspect to it, because I think there's the composing side. And to Ariel's point, you might sit in a room all day by yourself and compose and compose and compose. And then you wake up the next morning, get a huge coffee and sit down and listen to it. And you're like, oh shit, I overwrote this. This is way too finger pointy, too emotional. You're stepping all over the actors. And that's where it's nice to have a writing partner, because that person can kind of confirm or deny what you're feeling. And sometimes you disagree with each other, but even if you disagree with each other, it's not up to us. It's going to be up to the studio, the showrunner, producer. So if we really disagree, we'll present multiple ideas, but it's very helpful, I think.
It crushes your ego and your emotions real fast. Yeah, I think interesting thing about it is that I find that just artists in general, writers or all different kinds of artists, they tend to sometimes think that something isn't good maybe when it is good, or something's fantastic when it's terrible. And it's good to have some feedback, whether it's from your music editor, you're just someone who can give you some honest feedback. And I think it's incredibly helpful, especially when you're on something where, the stakes could be high and you're given a lot of leeway, but if you make mistakes, it could be not go well. So I think it's really good to have that sort of input and that feedback early on.
Great. Well, I genuinely love all of these shows and all of your work on them. So I really appreciate you taking the time to come out and talk with me tonight about them. So thanks, everybody.
Thank you. Thanks for talking to us.